Hey, welcome everybody. This is Ray Lucia Jr. and oh my gosh, I cannot believe it. Episode 1 of our podcast. This is Managing Your Financial Future. I am with my cousin, my partner, Joe Lucia, president of Lucia Capital Group. Joe, what's up?
Hey, Ray. This is pretty exciting. Our first podcast. Thought we'd kick it off with some stories.
Well, it's funny you mentioned stories, Joe, because I remember when we used to drive up. I mean, we opened up our office up in Newport Beach, and it was a period of time in our lives where we're just kind of learning and how to build an office from scratch. And I just used to tell all these stories. It was a good time with you.
We would burn the midnight oil, and there were several times I'd have to tell you after about the third story, we had to cut it short.
I enjoy telling stories. It helps build rapport with people. But sometimes I tell one too many stories. So Joe came up with this code language, I guess. Why don't you tell everybody about it? I'm still laughing about it.
So we were up in Newport Beach, and we were meeting with a nice couple. And, we were about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes into the meeting. And I could tell they were ready to move on with their evening. But Junior started about his fifth story, and I had to tell him afterwards, hey, that was like 3 stories too many. So next time, this is what we're going to do. When the meeting's getting a little long, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to set it out on the table.
Oh, no. It's not just like set it out on the table, folks. It is like
slam it down on the table.
He slams it down in the middle of the table so that I can see it, so that I can shut the you-know-what up. And that's been our code ever since. And now everybody here at the company knows when Junior's told one too many stories, it's like in unison. Can you imagine like 50 people at the same time pulling their Mont Blanc out of their pocket and putting it on the pen? Hey, CEO, it's time to shut the hell up. And that's, I love our people, Joe, and it's all because of you.
I saved you from, the black and blue shins because kicking you under the desk wasn't working.
It wasn't working. It's all those years playing lacrosse. I don't feel anything on my shins. But, so telling stories is really kind of the foundation of what we're going to do here at this podcast. We're going to lead off every podcast with a story, and then we're going to turn it over to the team. And, you're going to have Johnny Dean leading the discussion with Rick, the Professor Plum, and some other members of our team, and maybe even some special guests from time to time, where they'll talk more in depth about financial strategies and ideas so that you can, gain some insight into what it's like to work with a financial advisor and to have a plan and a strategy to help you manage your financial future. So, Joe, we were talking about this one situation. Well, they think they had it all dialed in, right? I mean, they're doing everything right. They're working with a financial advisor. They've got their strategy dialed in. But, sometimes, you think you've got it all squared away, but there are sometimes scenarios that pop up that could throw a wrench in it. So
correct. And what would happen should one of them pass away? And, they were counting on, the money every month. They didn't realize that when one of them passed, they weren't going to keep the income. They'd only get one of the Social Securities. So, in that scenario, their income basically got cut in half. Now, they had other income sources and things, but, for this discussion, we really need to understand, hey, what happens should you lose a spouse? And, we all know one day you're going to kick the bucket.
And it's never fun to have those types of conversations. But that's our job, right? It's our job as financial advisors to bring up those difficult conversations and to plan for the unforeseen. And in this case, you got it all dialed in. Retirement plan looks perfect. But what if something happens to one of you and then whack, it's not half of your total income, it'll be half of your direct income or your Social Security benefits, but that may represent like 30%. So now all of a sudden you got a 30% gap in income that you got to find from somewhere within the rest of your portfolio. And if you don't plan appropriately for that scenario, then you might be out of luck.
So there's lots of different scenarios, but that's what we really want to get into and talk about and educate people so they know what to expect should something happen.
It's really just taking the time to lay out the scenarios, to understand the pros and the cons so you can make educated decisions with a smart financial team and financial advisors. And so that's what this is all about here, managing your financial future. We hope you tune in every episode. And right now, we're going to turn it over to the team to go a little bit more into detail about this topic, because there's lots of different nuances, and I hope you enjoy the content.
Here's Johnny.
It's been almost 2 decades we've been on this journey to educate, liberate, and help you take action so you may better manage your financial future, achieve peace of mind, and accomplish your life's purpose. This podcast reveals financial tips, strategies, and insights that will help you set your goals and guide you along the way to help you achieve them. This is Managing Your Financial Future, brought to you by the advisors at Lucia Capital Group. I'm your host, Johnny Dean, with our own Rick the Professor Plum, Chief Financial Planning Officer. All right, podcast time. Welcome, Johnny Dean here. Professor Rick Plum. Say hi, Rick.
Good morning and afternoon, evening, whatever time
Wherever
you're listening to this.
That's the beauty of a podcast. You can listen anytime. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that intro. And so let's get to this here. Social Security. You know, Social Security is a form. We look at it as a form of guaranteed income.
Well, it is guaranteed by the government, and it's one of those incomes that you can't screw up.
No.
Because you were either good, bad investor, lucky, unlucky. It happens. And once you start it, but your decision is when you start it. And unfortunately, by the time you get around to starting it, the number is pretty much set because it's based on 35 years. So the only thing you have a choice of taking is early, late, or on time. So once you get there, it's not all that easy to manipulate that number.
And what I find interesting, it's guaranteed income, but only while you're alive. You see, and
well, for a lot of people after they've passed, they're not worried. But how many times on the show did we talk about the survivor issue?
Well, and that's exactly it. You know, some people purchase annuities, right? And some of these annuities can continue through the joint life, which I think people are aware of. Here's where the confusion comes, and Ray mentioned this in his remarks here. I think people tend to look at it. They hear about a survivor benefit, right? For Social Security. So they say, okay, well, I'm getting $2,000 a month, let's say, and my spouse is getting $2,000 a month. When they die, I get my $2,000 a month because it's mine, and then there's a survivor benefit. So, you know,
if only. It doesn't quite work that way.
No.
There is a survivor benefit, and for those of you that have your own benefit, when the survivor issue happens, you get the higher of the two.
Yes.
You don't get both of them stacked on top of each other.
Which would be nice, as you said.
But it's not going to happen because that's the way the system works. So if in your case you've got 2 individuals, married individuals, and they are both getting $2,000 a month from Social Security, they're both post full retirement age, and one of them passes away, the smaller, well, in this case, they're the same size. So the $2,000 a month is going to go away, and you'll just continue with the other $2,000. So you went from $4,000 a month of Social Security down to $2,000 a month of Social Security.
That's quite a cut.
And it depends on how you've set up your financial life, how that cut is going to affect you. If this is the majority of your income or a big portion of your income, that may be a hard cut to swallow for that surviving spouse.
I would say a 50% cut in income is, at least from a Social Security standpoint. Now, we can talk about ways to remedy this. I know there's life insurance and a few things that you might want to consider. Now, this was put into place. It might seem odd, you know. Well, so what kind of survivor benefit is that? I get no benefit if we had equal Social Securities, or very little if they were almost equal. But this was put in place back in like 1939, where there was generally just one breadwinner for the house, usually the man, and in that case, if the breadwinner died, they would continue to get their income. That was a good thing. Problem is, of course, now you have two working spouses. Yeah. You have oftentimes, in fact, you will probably have 2 Social Securities. So that's why it's kind of an unintended
cut and pay.
It's a consequence. It's sort of an unintended consequence of Social Security.
And we bring this up a lot when we're talking about A, Social Security planning, B, investment planning and retirement planning, because it's one thing to look at what you guys need as a married couple. It's another thing to look at the second stage, which may be a survivor issue, and where is that survivor going to get their money? Because in many cases, if you have a pension, at least some, if not all, that pension goes away when you do. Some of the Social Security will go away when you do, but not all the expenses of the survivor are going to go down to nothing. It's not like the survivor is half of the income. I mean, usually, there may be some less expense when somebody passes away. Presumably there was some expense for that individual, but it doesn't just cut the overall
No.
expenses in half.
No, it doesn't. And for people I think don't, if they're not talking to somebody about their finances, they don't really think about this aspect of it. Now, as I said, there are ways to remedy this.
Part of it is through planning and deciding when to take the Social Security. And sometimes you see the lower Social Security spouse or take one early and then another one take it later. So there's actually a disparate amount between the two benefits, so that you have, as one of the examples Ray talked about, was you're only giving up a smaller amount for a survivor. The survivor continues with the higher of the two benefits.
This what we're talking about, of course, is the biggest problem comes when you have almost or equal benefits, because you lose half. If I think Ray mentioned, if one spouse had a $2,800 benefit and the other one had an $800 benefit, say,
you're still giving up something, but it's nowhere near as much as giving up that $2,000 in the earlier example.
You lose the $800 benefit, but you keep the $2,800. It's not a great deal to lose $800 a month,
no,
but it's better than losing half.
It's better than losing a bigger number, and one that you're used to being able to spend. So part of the ability to work through the survivor issue is planning. The other is, if you've gotten to a point where you don't have those options anymore, now how do we deal with it? Is it just flat out you're going to take a cut and pay and you have to deal with it? Or is there a way to have some life insurance to pick it up, the difference, and be able to add some assets? Or do you have enough assets that it's not an issue?
Well, if I didn't plan for it, the cut and pay is going to happen no matter what.
Yes.
And if I didn't have anything in place, like life insurance, or if I don't have a portfolio or something where I can draw on.
Right. So it may be that you consciously, during your joint lives, spend a lower distribution amount from your portfolio to provide for that surviving spouse in the future. Unfortunately, these are unknowns. How long of a period of time will there be a surviving spouse? It's not always where there's a 10, 15 year, 20 year period of time that the survivor lives past the first spouse, but sometimes it's fairly short time. And so do you cut yourself short while you're both alive just in case you have a long survivor issue?
Yeah.
These are tough issues.
Have you heard of people, Professor Plum, who have said, well, I'm retired now at age 65 or something like that. I've always had life insurance, but I'm not going to do it because I don't have a job coming in, so I'm going to cancel my life insurance policy. Now, I mean, a term policy is going to run out at some point anyway, but I've heard it recommended to some people that you should drop it because you don't have your paycheck coming in anymore.
Well, I've heard it said that if you can afford to retire, why do you need life insurance? Your money's coming from your portfolio and your other benefits,
Social Security or pensions or whatever it is.
Well, why do you need life insurance? It may be because the pension and Social Security go away, and there's still expenses to continue.
Well, exactly, and this is where planning comes into play. I just don't think people necessarily pay attention to, well, how much am I getting and how much are you getting? Because of the misconception that a survivor benefit is stacked on top of your own benefit.
From a Social Security standpoint, that's a very big misconception.
All it means is you get the higher of yours or your spouse's.
Right. One of them is going to drop off.
One of them's going to drop off.
And if they're equal or similar in size, that's a pretty good size cut and pay.
It sure is. It sure is. So remedies. Well, first of all, you mentioned maybe you could, live on less while you're alive, not live on the portfolio.
Live on less of the portfolio. Because you want the portfolio to grow during your joint lives, so there's a bigger portfolio when you ultimately leave a survivor issue. Do your Roth conversions so that the survivor has a more tax efficient time in survivorship mode rather than an increase in expenses at the same time with the higher taxes.
They're a single individual now, which is a whole different tax situation.
But it all comes down to planning. How much time you have to do this planning. Are you making these decisions before you've gotten to a point where you're going to make your Social Security decisions? What's your longevity look like? And we have to look at both sides of it. What happens if you live too long? What happens if you unfortunately pass away too soon? What is your portfolio? How much? Some people will retire, they both start their Social Security, and they're basically hitting that portfolio for the max because that's what they need while they're alive. They're both alive. Mm-hmm. And they don't look into the future, and they don't say, well, what happens if one of us dies? And part of the pension goes away. One of the Social Securities goes away. And we've been not letting the portfolio grow because we've been stripping the income from it every year. So now there's not much of a portfolio.
So if you're in a situation and you're sitting here listening to this podcast and you're thinking, well, both of my spouse and I have pretty good Social Security benefits, and as a result, we don't have a whole lot of money stacked away, so we're going to be getting a good portion of our retirement income from Social Security. They're staring at this situation of, well, one of them is probably going to die before the other. Now, this could be a big problem if they die early. Would you recommend, Professor Plum, continue a life insurance policy, purchase a separate one while they still can?
Well, it depends on the type of life insurance they currently have. Term insurance, as you mentioned earlier, at some point is going to get too expensive. Mm-hmm. That's the whole idea of term. It doesn't, and the closer you get to normal mortality, the more expensive it gets, because the insurance company is realizing, we may actually have to pay out on this thing. So the closer you get, it's just a fact of business life with insurance.
They're not in the business of paying people insurance. I mean, they don't want to do it if they can help it.
So depending upon the type of insurance you have, maybe you convert it to a form of a guaranteed universal life or something of that nature. At this point, if you're already in your 60s and you're taking your Social Security and you don't have the options to redeploy the portfolio too much, you're probably going to be looking at, you don't want a cash value policy that's going to grow as a retirement asset, because A, you're in retirement, you don't have the time for it to work for you, and you don't have the premium dollars to be able to put out for those types of policies. You want basically the lowest cost that you can get for the time that you're going to need it. And the time is the rest of your life.
Like a guaranteed universal life, potentially.
I think that's where a guaranteed universal life works. And how much you need, that gets into how much, do we need to support 30, 40 years worth of retirement needs? Probably not. So you may not need to have a huge, but you may need to replace that $20,000, $24,000 a year for 5-10 years. Yeah.
Or what about
Social Security? Yeah.
So life insurance is one way to go. If somebody doesn't feel like that's right for them for whatever reason, or maybe they're uninsurable, what about some sort of an issue? What about some sort of an annuity payment, guaranteed income through an insurance company?
Well, you can always add to that. Now the question is, do you need it now during your lifetime, or do you need it only if there's a survivor issue? And maybe you do it while you're alive, making sure that it's a joint payout, and use that to accumulate assets for the future. That way you have it, you've already locked it in so that you may not need the income right now, but you take the income and you direct it to a growth portfolio so that over the next 10 years, while you're both still alive, you build up some extra money on the side, and then one of you passes away, you've got the guaranteed income and you've got some extra portfolio.
This is where guarantees make a whole lot of sense. I'm a big fan, as you probably know. Personally, I'm a big fan of the guaranteed income. I like to know what the worst possible situation is. I like to know that it's going to keep coming in. I'm less concerned about rate of return as long as I can live on what I can on what's coming in.
Right, as long as you've got a guaranteed of income for the rest of your life, where you're not going to be poor, you're not going to be kicked out for any reason, then it's a little bit easier to sleep at night.
So if I'm in a situation where our Social Securities are fairly equal and I don't have much else, we talked about life insurance as potentially being one. Maybe figuring out.
Or you either spend less, buy some guarantees, or get some insurance if you're at the situation where you can't manipulate the incomes that you're receiving.
So maybe try to live off of just one of the Social Securities and maybe sock away the other Social Security. I don't know.
It may not be an option, but you need to explore what will happen if one of you passes away.
Yeah, it's not thought of very often. So these are, as I said, potential remedies: life insurance, some form of guaranteed income through an annuity, perhaps. Maybe learning to live off of less, socking a little bit more of it away. You talked about living, perhaps not taking so much from your portfolio.
Right, which is similar to buying a life insurance policy, because you're using part of the portfolio income to buy the life insurance. But you brought up a good issue in that, unfortunately, when we get into our 60s and later, we may not be able to get life insurance because of health issues.
It's something to think about.
So instead of making a premium payment, we kind of make the premium payment to ourselves by not taking as much money out of the portfolio, so that the portfolio at least can grow a little bit for the surviving spouse, rather than maybe getting a tax-free death benefit.
Now, very quickly, before we got to wrap it up here in a sec, but before we do, go back to this life insurance issue. If somebody has a term policy that they were able to get that was fairly affordable, 3 or 4 years before they retire, just because they wanted it in place, and they come to you and they say, well, I'm thinking of getting rid of it.
Well, let's make sure that you don't need any death benefit. Before you drop any life insurance policy that you currently have, make sure you don't need it, because the worst thing to do is to drop the insurance, then find out, well, I really do need some life insurance, and you find out, I'm not as healthy as I thought. The doctor didn't give me that super clean, squeaky clean bill of health, and now I can't get the insurance. So you want to at least look into what's going on with your life, whether you need what you have, and maybe convert a portion of it to a more permanent style policy based on the insurability that you showed years ago rather than the insurability that you have today.
We talk about managing your financial future, and that's exactly what this is. It's the podcast, Managing Your Financial Future. People should know very quickly, Professor Plum, that we do have a Social Security decision kit. This may be something that interests them. This goes more along the lines of maybe when should I take it, how should I take it.
That's when you have the option of planning for Social Security, not after you're 75 and you've already taken it for 10 years.
Yes. It's always good to do it ahead. Planning, you can't really plan afterwards, so planning ahead, while that's sort of an odd phrase to say, it's exactly what you do. If you want to learn more about our Social Security Decision Kit, you can get in touch with us right here at Lucia Capital Group. We also have our weekly webinar, not a weekly, but we do have webinars, and oftentimes they deal with Social Security. Taxation is a big one, but if you want to learn more, you can check us out on our webcast.
Well, good, better, and different. Social Security forms the foundation for many retirees' income life.
Absolutely, if not most.
Yeah, and so it is an important factor in your retirement plan.
Exactly. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. My thanks to Ray Lucia Jr. for jumping in here and giving us the idea to talk about. If you need more information from us, you can talk to us at luciacap.com. You can also give us a call, 800-644-1150, and talk with Professor Plum yourself. For Professor Rick Plum, I'm Johnny Dean. This is the podcast, Managing Your Financial Future. We'll talk to you again next time.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice. It is not intended or written and cannot be used for the purpose of avoiding penalties imposed by law. You should seek independent advice from a tax professional. This material was gathered from sources believed to be reliable. Its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. SSA website is at www.ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. No client or prospective client should assume that the presentation or any component thereof serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from LCG or from any other investment professional. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There is no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. Annuities are long-term investment products designed for retirement purposes. Guarantees are based on the claims-paying ability of the issuer, subject to their terms and conditions. Early withdrawals may be subject to surrender penalties and, if taken prior to age 59.5, may be subject to an additional 10% federal tax. Annuities are not FDIC insured. Certain terms and conditions apply, so please read insurance company materials carefully. Insurance product guarantees are subject to the claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are subject to their terms and conditions. Insurance products offered through Lucia Securities, LLC. California Insurance License Number 0H40817. Lucia Securities is the DBA for Lucia Insurance Services. The investment professionals are registered representatives with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. Lucia Securities, LLC was acquired by LPL Financial August 2020. The investment professionals of Lucia Securities, LLC are now affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Lucia Capital.